Oh, go ahead.
All right. Once again, you have been given pads of paper and pens, so you can start to write your questions, and my colleagues will start to collect your questions, although there is one already prepared whenever Professor Beckwith is ready. Professor Beckwith, what text would you recommend for a person to read to be more informed on the principles of good reasoning and sound argument?
Well, you know what? I wrote a book called Defending Life, a moral and legal case against abortion choice, which was published about 3 years ago now by Cambridge University Press, which, by the way, I was actually, and Jennifer Roback-Norris can testify to this, I was shocked that it got accepted, and I found out later, I mean, because most of the leading academic presses are fairly liberal on these sorts of issues, but it turns out that because of Boonin's book, they felt an obligation to sort of publish a counter to it. And so in a way, I kind of thank David for writing his book. But yeah, it came out a couple years ago, and that book, what I deal with a number of issues in that book. The first thing I deal with is the issue of whether you can argue about moral questions. And so there's a chapter on that, and then there's a chapter dealing with the Roe v. Wade in particular. I have an extensive critique of Roe's reasoning. And then the rest of the book really deals with the arguments. I have a chapter on field development and abortion methods, and then a chapter dealing with some of the arguments I dealt with earlier today, dealing with Boonin's argument as well as others. And then there's an argument I didn't have a chance to go over today that some of the philosophers in the audience and people who teach bioethics may be aware of, by Judith Jarvis Thomson, who's a philosopher who recently retired from MIT. She argues that abortion is justified even if the fetus is a person. And she uses the kind of libertarian argument by saying that nobody has a right to use another's body against their will. And so even if a woman consents to sex and pregnancy results, she did not consent to pregnancy. And so on those grounds, abortion is justified. And it's an argument that actually Boonin himself resurrects in a piece that was published about 14 years ago. So that's an argument that a lot of, you rarely hear in the public square, but it's one that if you ever took a course in moral philosophy or applied ethics, you will face it. And I deal with that argument extensively as well. And also the cloning debate. The last chapter deals with cloning. So go ahead. But so my book. By the way, there's another book by a guy named Scott Klusendorf called The Case for Life. I just reviewed it for First Things. It's a really nice book. He has a ministry called Life Training Institute, and it's called, and their purpose is pro-life apologetics. That's his. So he does a really good job, and he quotes a lot from my book. Okay. Okay, that's a good one, yeah.
Is it genuinely justified to cause a person?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Sure. Yeah, yeah, you go ahead, yeah. Oh, let me do it. Which one first? Oh, this one first. Oh, okay, yeah. All right. Sounds good.
Professor Beckwith, is it genuinely justifiable to oppose personhood amendments for the fear of legal repercussions?
Thank you. I suspect that the questioner is referring to some of these laws that have been, I think, like, was it Idaho? I think there are a couple of states, Colorado, I think in the last election put on its ballot a kind of a state version of like a human life amendment. I think, my view on this, and this is, some of you may disagree with me on this, I think unless it's a federal amendment, it's probably going to be overturned by the Supreme Court. So my thinking is that if you want to amend a constitution, amend the federal constitution, because that way the Supreme Court hasn't yet figured out a way to say that an amendment to the Constitution is unconstitutional. Although actually wouldn't be so, actually there's a John Grisham novel in this, by the way. They haven't figured out quite yet how to do that. So my view is, and this is where I think prudential judgment has to kick in. You have to look at what is winnable in terms of the electorate and what you're trying to do by the legislation. So for instance, my good friend Hadley Argus, who teaches at Amherst College, he was behind this Born Alive Infant Protection Act, which federal Congress passed and George Bush signed into law, I think about 4 or 5 years ago. The purpose of the amendment was to, which said that any hospital that got federal funding had to treat the survivors of abortion, that is, infants that were not killed in abortion, as if, or just like they treated premature births. And the purpose of it was, of course, we all know that there are very few abortions like that. The purpose was a teaching purpose. That is, if you raise the question, well, if we have to protect the child that survives the abortion, how does it differ from the one that didn't survive the abortion? And so Hadley did, when it passed, in fact, he tells the story in his book, Natural Rights and the Right to Choose. He tells the story of a congressman who was a former student of his who was so excited because he said, you know what, even the pro-choice people are going to vote for it. There's going to be no debate on the floor. And Hadley says, I want a debate. The purpose of it is not just to pass the law. The purpose of it is to engage in a public conversation, to teach people. So we have to sometimes ask ourselves, you know, especially given the certain political climates, given different states have different, I mean, I suspect, for example, Texas, it would be much easier to pass a human life amendment than in California. But of course the problem is any sort of state that passes an amendment that says that the unborn is to be treated as a person is going to be challenged. Now the key, I think one way to do this is to do a kind of conditional amendment. Say something like this, we define a person as any member of the human community that has been conceived, or something like that. But it doesn't apply to statutory law in light of all other laws, both federal and state. That to have that condition, it can never in principle be overturned because all it will do is it will kick in if Roe v. Wade is overturned. But while Roe v. Wade is in place, you can't overturn it because it actually takes that into consideration. That'd be a clever way to sort of deal with that. And the state of Missouri actually has something like that in the preamble to one of its abortion restriction laws, where it says, we believe life begins at conception, but we won't enforce this. We will enforce this in light of federal and state laws. And so, basically, it can't be overturned because it's not actually being enforced. So it would be a clever way to sort of put that there just in case Roe v. Wade is overturned. So
You can
all right. All right. Well, Professor Beckwith, why, these are two related questions, I think, and if you disagree with me, talk to me at lunch about it. Why do pro-choice people believe abortion to be a good, even when they know intellectually that abortion kills a person? What is the good from their perspective? And I think related to that, I told you, when faced with logical inconsistencies, such as being against cloning brainless children and supporting abortion, people usually give up logical consistency so that they can still support abortion.
yeah.
Comments?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, lots of people, this is part of trying to be a virtuous citizen, is to make sure that your views align with right reason. Now, I found it, and you're right, I mean, I years ago when I was at UNLV, I had a very dear friend in the philosophy department who told me very candidly, she goes, I can't respond to any of your pro-life arguments. She goes, but I'm not going to change my mind. I mean, so clearly, there's something else going on there. And there's no doubt about it that the people, in fact, will not accept the logic of the pro-life position, even if it means they have to live with an inconsistency. Now, having said that, though, I think we underestimate the importance of planting seeds in people's minds. That is, sometimes, yes, that you're not going to have, very rarely do you have somebody just say, I changed my mind. Usually it takes a long time. And usually, you know, anytime, and I, from my own personal history, there are a number of things that I've changed my mind on, and it never was the consequence of reading one book or one argument. It was really a kind of, you know, over the years, it kind of gets chipped away. And so I think we have to be confident in the fact that the pro-life position and the pro-life movement is a long-term project. And it's not one that's going to end if, let's say, the pro-life movement is victorious legally. It means instilling a pro-life understanding in our culture and our civilization that goes far beyond just simply winning arguments. But I do think one of the things that, I mean, this is the philosopher side coming out. I think it's important to point out to people that if, in fact, they want to abandon logic and reason concerning the nature of the unborn, then they better watch out, because there could be other people in our society who are willing to abandon logic and reason concerning other rights that they hold dear. So you have to be, you know, the argument, if the argument is, well, I don't care if it's irrational, then of course now you've abandoned the grounds for the pro-choice position. I mean, the pro-choice people actually believe they're rational, and they hold a rational argument. Well, if reason doesn't matter, if good arguments don't matter, then why can't the state simply restrict abortion and not give you a reason? So at the end of the day, even the other side must at least rely on some sort of understanding that it's important to give reasons for why one believes what one believes. Now, the other part of it had to deal with whether it's a good. I'm not sure that most pro-choice people think abortion's a good. Most of the people that I know that are pro-choice will say things like it's a tragic thing, abortion. So I think you have to, very few people anymore, I mean, I remember in the 70s and 80s, mid-80s, when I first began writing and reading in this area, there were a lot of people that would actually offer abortion as a good. Like they'd say things like, it'll hold down the population, you know, or you need abortion in order to, you know, a woman may need an abortion if it disrupts her career or something like that. And you rarely hear those today. And the reason is that they kind of people find that kind of offensive now. You know, it's a kind of, abortion's serious. And so the pro-choice side is actually, I think, doesn't play that up anymore. And they play up the sort of, there are just circumstances that are so tragic, we have to allow it, but it's still bad. So I do think that pro-lifers should be encouraged by the fact that many of the arguments that we heard in the early days of when abortion first became legal and soon afterwards are really gone now. I rarely hear the population explosion argument. And I think the reason is it does have that kind of eugenics tone to it, doesn't it? And people kind of, they kind of freak out about that, and rightfully so. So I'm not sure whether pro-choicers treat abortion as a good. In fact, if anything, they actually, in some cases, treat pregnancy as a good, but abortion is a necessary evil. So I actually think in many ways pro-lifers should be encouraged by the fact that the public arguments have clearly moved to our advantage, I think.